Hi everyone, welcome to another Letters to an Asexual. This is Swank Ivy, and we're on number 95. Yes, Letters to an Asexual number 95. And today I'm going to talk about a comment that I got that evolved into a series of discussions about the intersection of autism and asexuality. It's being very kind to call it a discussion, however. If you have ever been an asexual person on the internet, or you have ever been an autistic person on the internet, or, God forbid, both, you probably know how unpleasant it can sometimes be when people like to use one or both of those things as insults and then pretend that they're not saying anything bad, but they really are. So hopefully I'm able to offer a properly nuanced discussion of this. I may make some mistakes, so please let me know if you have any questions or any criticisms of anything that I'm saying. But I'm going to try to do my best to address this appropriately. First, I should give you the context. This is the tone that this guy set. This was his first comment, and he left this on my asexual bingo video way back in the day. And he wrote, "You have Asperger's. Not being mean, I'm dead serious." Yeah, man. So, I mean, considering all the hoops people generally have to jump through in order to get an actual diagnosis, I venture to say that a dude watching me on YouTube does not have the data to assign me any kind of autism spectrum variation. And also I'm pretty sure that even at the time that he said this, Asperger's was no longer a definition people used. I don't think it was a diagnosis anymore. I'm gonna look that up. Okay, according to Wikipedia, Asperger's syndrome, AS, also known as Asperger's, was the name of a neurodevelopmental disorder no longer recognized as a diagnosis in itself, having been merged into autism spectrum disorder, ASD. Okay. It was characterized by significant difficulties in social interaction and nonverbal communication, along with restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior and interests. It was said to differ from other diagnoses that were merged into ASD by relatively unimpaired language and intelligence. The syndrome was named after the Austrian pediatrician Hans Asperger, who in 1944 described children in his care who struggled to form friendships, did not understand others' gestures or feelings, engaged in one-sided conversations about their favorite interests, and were clumsy. Okay. So, before I get into this, I want to say I have always had multiple neurodiverse friends in my circles, and I think I have a few things in common with them, and I have considered at times whether maybe I was on the spectrum, but I have never been diagnosed. And I was taken to a couple of psychologists when I was a child who basically never said anything except that I was verbally advanced and probably needed to be in more advanced classes. I'm sure that's a story plenty of us former gifted kids are familiar with. But after listening to what a lot of my autistic friends deal with and what their experiences are, I don't find that I've experienced the so-called definitive aspects of autism, which are said to be significant difficulties in social interaction and nonverbal communication alongside restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior and interests. I don't want to spend too much time discussing the definition of autism, because it really isn't the point of the video, but I do want people to know that I've had a lot of great nuanced conversations with autistic friends and acquaintances that have led me to ultimately conclude that I don't have a reason to believe I'm on the spectrum, and I do not identify as autistic or neurodiverse or Aspie. But regardless of whether I actually was autistic, this guy was already way in the wrong. Considering how many of my broad interests I displayed right here on YouTube, and the fact that he has never seen any of my social interaction, and he's woefully lacking in data to give an accurate assessment of my psychological condition. And on top of that, the telltale way that he expects me to interpret "you have Asperger's" as an insult definitely betrays his intention there. If you're actually curious about whether someone has been tested for an autism spectrum variation and you want to know about it, you don't just walk up to them and say, hey, you have this thing. And like, you don't start the conversation without the other person's agreed participation and willingness to consent to this kind of sensitive topic. And you sure don't make ridiculous assumptions to make your opinion fit, which you will see he goes on to do. So after he said that I had Asperger's, and he's not being mean, but he's just dead serious, I said this. No, it's not mean to say someone has Asperger's syndrome. It is, however, ridiculous and laughable to pretend you can diagnose someone with a type of autism over the internet. Stop pretending you know what you're talking about. Because anyone with any real knowledge of psychology knows way better than to toss armchair diagnoses at people they've never spoken to. If you guessed that he would come back with the argument of authority, you are right. I have a degree in psych from C.W. Post Long Island University. I am watching the asexual documentary that you are in as we speak, and right after I said you may have Asperger's, they started making connections between asexuality and Asperger's. There is a large spectrum of autism, but Asperger's syndrome commonly includes problems with communication, check, difficulty getting romantically close to others, check, and also problems with physical interaction, even non-sexual, check, and much more. I don't know if you've seen the asexual documentary, but there was an asexual person in the documentary who identified as autistic and felt that her autism and her asexuality were linked, and she discussed that in her particular case. It's really disingenuous of this guy to try to act like the movie explored the link between these two things and concluded that they're related and that every asexual person is autistic or something. Like, that's just so shitty. Anyway, so surprise, he has a psych degree, and that totally means that he can diagnose me over the internet, which psychologists don't do, and it totally means he can't possibly be abusing his imagined authority. Dear God, I graduated from the College of Education with people that I prayed would never be in front of a classroom. And it totally means he has full knowledge of my life in the areas he rattled off. But, okay, so everybody here who thinks I have problems with communication, raise your hand. Not to mention that that's hideously oversimplified. Okay, so when I first shared this conversation on Tumblr, like a long time ago, I had a really good exchange with an online acquaintance who's autistic and was worried that I was misunderstanding the communication issue, the trouble with communication aspect, because I talked about my experiences using my communication skills while I was getting my education degree, when I was like laughing at this guy for thinking that his degree was some kind of trump card. So to avoid making that mistake again, I want to say I definitely don't think that autism precludes all kinds of communication, and like I know that diagnoses of autism depend on atypical interpersonal interaction that presents in like certain patterns. And they don't stop autistic people from engaging in other types of communication, and it's not the same across the spectrum either. So, but like I do think that as flimsy as this guy's "but I have a psych degree" defenses are, if I had suggested that my degree required me to interact one-on-one and in large groups and interpersonally with my students and other teachers, and that I did so without any marked difficulty, I think he wouldn't have been able to cling to his degree entitling him to proof of his rightness if mine didn't prove something too. But more importantly though, the various ways that like my autistic friends and acquaintances have described the way that their communication difficulties manifest doesn't sound familiar to me, really at all. For instance, I don't really have trouble with picking up nonverbal cues or interpreting facial expressions, and I generally don't have that experience of feeling like all of the neurotypical people are on some vibe or some wavelength that I can't get on. I don't have that feeling, and I know that a lot of my autistic friends and acquaintances have said that feels like everybody knows something is going on and they just can't figure it out. So anyway, I think that's the closest I really get to being on that wavelength is I can be sort of literal. I can be very literal in some of my communication, and also I tend to be a little bit long-winded, but I mean, those are not definitive aspects. They're just a little bit of variation in typical communication, I suppose. But a lot of what my autistic friends and acquaintances have discussed, I mean, it really sounds mostly like stuff I don't relate to. Like, it sounds still relatable, like, oh, I could see how someone could have that experience, but it's not something that I would have found familiar, if that makes sense. Anyway, so to get back on track to discussing the asexuality aspect of this, I gotta say, like, I love how he claims that I have problems getting romantically close to others. I imagine that if he's a straight guy, he probably has problems getting romantically close to other men. God, that's such a terrible attempt to pigeonhole me. And what physical interaction does he think I have trouble with? He hasn't seen me interact with anybody. I hate when people trying to pretend their argument is logical just completely fall apart when it's time to make a coherent argument. But don't worry, he does a lot more of that in a much more apparent way as the conversation goes on. So here's what I actually said in response to that. Honey, the only thing you saying you have a degree does is show how some people abuse their educational experience to make the fallacious argument from authority. It's really disgusting of you to assume that because you studied psychology, you're entitled to diagnose people you haven't spoken to. I do not have communication issues, difficulty getting romantically close to others, because that implies I try to, or any physical interaction problems. Stop pretending you have data. But he continued to post, and threw 3 comments at the same time. You are, by definition of my textbook, within the autistic spectrum, obviously high-functioning. You wouldn't even consider you possibly have Asperger's? Instead, you attack me? My reply to that, it's nice and easy to suggest someone is textbook if you exaggerate and misrepresent aspects of their behavior to fit what you want to see. The central definitive aspects of Asperger's do not apply to me. I am not attacking you by saying you should stop diagnosing people you don't know on the internet and deliberately misinterpreting their experience so it will match what you're pretending you can see. His next comment, also, putting asexuality aside, your body language, being immature by the way you dress and talk, hiding behind computers and videos to communicate, and simply the way you speak all lead me to Asperger's. Obviously, it's hard to diagnose someone through a couple of videos, but when you talk about the symptoms you're having, it rings a huge bell in my mind. And my reply to that, and this is all very trollish. I'm immature? Oh, sure. I completely take care of myself financially, enjoy rich relationships with others, have no complicating factors in my ability to live independently, and am pursuing my goals in a responsible way. But surely the best way to judge someone immature is if they wear cartoon t-shirts and plastic barrettes. People who weaponize maturity in a conversation tend to be pretty immature and unable to empathize with others themselves. And again, for the record, I was assuming that the douchebag would be using standard grown-up criteria to judge my maturity, and I absolutely know there are many mature people in the world who are unable to live independently for various reasons that are unrelated to maturity. But at the time, YouTube comments were character limited, and I thought that this was a somewhat concise way for me to express my maturity in a YouTube comment. So, it's a very complicated issue, and I'm aware of that. Anyway, I continued in this reply. And it doesn't make sense to say I'm hiding behind computers to communicate, considering my videos are one of the many ways I've spread this message, along with getting my articles published, finding literary representation for my book on the subject, being on mainstream media television shows and print media, and giving in-person talks at conferences. I really think you're failing miserably at making me squeeze into what you want to pigeonhole me as. Just stop your ridiculousness. And wait, wasn't he watching me in a documentary like right before he came onto my videos to whine at me? How is that hiding behind a computer exactly if I'm doing video media that's broadcast all over the world? And then he added this treasure, which I have discussed separately before. LOL, your shirt says love, ironic. And I said this, please look up what irony means. You're using it incorrectly. It doesn't make any sense to suggest a person who is asexual has no business wearing a shirt that says love. Wow, that is vile. And I blocked him there, but something predictable happened. He came back on another account, surprise! And he has some choice words for me, laced with profanity, on his new account. Okay, now shit just got real, swank. Don't fucking block me. It's not my fault you are so goddamn insecure that you cannot listen to someone with a psychology degree suggesting that you may have a disorder. Shit, bitch. Also, you don't feel love romantically, and therefore you wearing a shirt that says love is ironic. I'm right, you're wrong, goodbye. He's right, I'm wrong, goodbye. Also, capital letters on his psychology degree must be more truer now. Because, you know, love only means romantic love, and there's no other kind of love, and it's silly and ironic for an asexual person to wear a shirt that says love. And geez, come on, wow, so ironic, because you totally wouldn't expect someone who doesn't have romantic love in her life to ever use or respect a word like love, oh my god. I wish I were not so ridiculous and that my arguments were not so flimsy, being trumped and trounced by this ever so educated man. Here's what I actually said. Oh noes, you're pissed that I've heard opinions not based on facts like yours over and over again, and now I don't want to give you a platform to display them. So you curse at me and tell me your psychology degree means you're qualified to tell me how disordered and insecure and immature I am, and LOL at how love is meaningless outside a romantic context. Wow. Just calm down and get over the fact that you don't automatically get a stage every time you throw your entitled little tantrums. Bye. I blocked that one too, and he didn't come back. I'm not sure why people like him think blocking them is tantamount to losing an argument or something. Like, they think I'm obligated to keep giving them space to just keep saying these things that I have countered over and over again. And like, they're not based on any accurate assessments of my life, but he still thinks that I have to listen to him or else I've lost some kind of argument with him. And he sure made it clearer and clearer as he went on that all of his associations with autism are negative. Like, he's using the word immature, and he's suggesting that I'm hiding behind a computer. And I mean, what is he doing then? I'm the one putting my face and my words in every form of media that exists, but I'm the one hiding, and he's the one who's having some kind of authentic interaction when he's just a screen name. Yeah, so he's the reasonable one here. I also think it's funny that he believes having a psychology degree means his jackass opinion will always be accurate. We in this community have multiple instances of psychologists and therapists and mental health practitioners being abusive or dismissive to us, and all professions have a history that includes abuse of power by some of its members. I have a minor in psychology myself, and it doesn't mean my opinion on anyone else's mental state is right. Actually, the way he throws his degree around in absence of any kind of support kind of makes me think he's the kind of person that gets a degree like that just so that he can feel really cool about his opinions becoming suddenly really important, and that people will have to listen to him in a professional context because he has this degree. I also noticed that he didn't say that he was a therapist or a psychologist, that he was actually working. He just said he had the degree, which it makes me think that if he had been in one of those professions, he would have tried to use that against me, right? So it makes me think he has the degree, but he's not actually practicing, and he doesn't really know anything about diagnostics. Regardless, like, getting a passing grade in a class about abnormal psychology doesn't mean that you can diagnose people. Like, if you're an actual psychologist, you know that you don't diagnose somebody by watching them on a video. and not having any actual evaluation of them. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a bitch who's too insecure and hiding behind my computer to be able to benefit from his amazing diagnosis. My life would have been so much richer if only I had accepted a drive-by diagnosis from a YouTube comment. Alright, that about wraps up this one. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll bring you some more ignorance next time.